Okay, give it a few more minutes. Everybody's starting to flood in. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the April edition of the Sci-Cafe. This is the Apalachicola National Estuarine Research Reserve's virtual series. And we have the fourth Thursday of the month from 3 to 4. And lets us know what type of science is going on around the Apalachicola Bay area. Connects the local people with the scientists that are working at the reserve. We'll go for about an hour, 45 minutes, and there'll be plenty of time for questions. And I wanted to introduce our speaker today. We're proud to have Bria Brooks. She is here from the University of West Florida. And the title of today's talk is Navigating the Waters of Resistance, Studying Marronage through Underwater Archaeology at Prospect Bluff, or Fort Gadsden as it has been known for years. And we're so glad to have her here. She's been great to have. She is completing her master's. Sorry, I forgot to mute my phone. She is completing her master's thesis research, and this is her project. So without further ado, Bria, take it away.
So hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. So for my presentation, I'm going to give you guys a brief introduction of myself and my project, give a description of what underwater archaeology and maroonage is, and then jump into the history and the archaeology that's been going on at Prospect Bluff concerning my project, followed by an ending discussion about its importance. So just to start off, my name is Bria Brooks again. I am a graduate anthropology student at the University of West Florida with a thesis focused in underwater archaeology related to Prospect Bluff. I'm also a graduate assistant with the Florida Public Archaeology Network. And for the last 6 months or so, I've been working on a dissertation project led by Nicole Grenon called The People of Apalachicola. So because I'm an underwater archaeologist, we're going to start off with what underwater archaeology actually is. So underwater archaeology is a branch of archaeology, and that branch of archaeology studies human and prehistory through the excavation and analysis of material remains, such as artifacts, structures, and environmental data. Archaeology is a multidisciplinary field that combines aspects of anthropology, history, art history, geography, geology, and other disciplines to reconstruct and understand past human cultures and society. So as underwater archaeologists, we focus on the study and recovery of submerged cultural material, sites, and resources. These sites can range from shipwrecks and sunken cities to submerged caves, settlements, and river settlements, such as those like Prospect Bluff. The goal of underwater archaeology is to understand past human societies, economies, cultures, and environments by studying the material remains that have been preserved underwater. The field of underwater archaeology usually provides valuable insights into maritime history, trade networks, even naval warfare, and the effects of sea level change on past civilizations. So how do we practice underwater archaeology as underwater archaeologists? So underwater archaeologists use various methods and technologies to study these sites, including archival research, remote sensing techniques such as sonar and magnetometry, and underwater photography. We also employ diving to physically examine and excavate artifacts and structures underwater. And in my case, community outreach has been an important method I use to practice underwater archaeology. So to start off with, our first method is archival research. So archival research involves the investigation and analysis of historical documents and records and materials stored in archives such as libraries, museums, and other repositories. We call these documents that we're looking for primary resources. Primary resources usually include letters, diaries, manuscripts, official records, photographs, maps, newspapers, and any other written or visual materials that can provide evidence about past events, peoples, or societies. So archival is really important for underwater archaeologists because we can gain insight into the past and identify and interpret archaeological sites. Archival documents sometimes have references to historical settlements and structures or events that have since been lost and or forgotten. So by studying archival records, we as archaeologists can locate potential archaeological sites and further understand their historical significance before we actually conduct field work. So archival research helps archaeologists develop like our first initial questions and research hypotheses, and it really helps guide investigations when it comes down to archaeological research. The second method I want to talk about is remote sensing survey. So remote sensing survey is what we do a lot of as underwater archaeologists. A remote sensing survey involves gathering information about archaeological sites and features without actually excavating or disturbing these sites. This technology allows us as archaeologists to collect data over large areas pretty quickly and non-invasively. Like I said, not excavating and not actually disturbing the archaeological site. So remote sensing survey usually helps us to identify potential sites, map features, and understand landscapes and characteristics. Remote sensing survey can be done from the air, the space, the ground, but we're talking about underwater archaeology. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk about marine magnetometer survey and side scan sonar survey, which I used at Prospect Bluff, and which we use as underwater archaeologists quite a lot. So a marine magnetometer survey is a geophysical survey conducted underwater using a magnetometer. The picture I have right here in the right is a magnetometer, and it's similar to the one we used. I couldn't find an exact picture of it, but this is pretty similar. So magnetometer is a device that measures the variations in the Earth's magnetic field. During a marine magnetometer survey, this big magnetometer thing is towed behind our boat, and it measures the intensity and direction of Earth's magnetic field at regular intervals as it moves through the water columns above the seabed. So in very basic terms, the magnetometer, while it's underwater, it looks for ferrous metals. Ferrous metals are anything containing like a lot of iron, like cast iron, raw iron, steel, nickel, titanium, things such as that. So this survey is usually used for underwater archaeologists to locate, map, and submerge archaeological features, like I said earlier. The second type of remote sensing survey that archaeologists do that I'm actually doing at Prospect Bluff too is a side scan sonar survey. So it's a geophysical survey technique used to create detailed images of the seafloor or lake bed or riverbed in this case. And it operates by transmitting acoustic signals from a towed or mounted sonar device, which then records and echoes reflected off the seafloor and any submerged objects or features. And when paired with the magnetometer data from the magnetometer I showed you earlier, archaeologists, we better have an understanding of a landscape. So to put the side scanner in pretty basic terms, it shoots sound to the bottom of the seafloor and then gives us a pretty detailed picture of what's actually on the seafloor. And when we pair that with magnetometer data, which is metal data, we can say, hey, here's a picture, here's where some metal be. There might be a cultural resource there. Which gets me to my third method of scientific diving that we as underwater archaeologists usually do. So scientific diving refers to the use of diving techniques and equipment for the purpose of conducting underwater research, exploration, and data collection in support of scientific inquiry. Unlike recreational diving, which is, chilling underwater and being leisurely, scientific diving is conducted by trained scientists or researchers to gather data, study marine environments, and for underwater archaeologists, sometimes we use it to survey and map archaeological sites. So scientific divers use underwater archaeology techniques such as underwater photography, videography, and photogrammetry and mapping to document archaeological features underwater. So sometimes we create 3D maps and 3D models and visual representations of submerged artifacts, structures, and landscapes to aid in site analysis or interpretation. Scientific divers, we also help in the conservation efforts to protect and preserve underwater archaeology sites and artifacts from natural and/or human-induced threats, such as erosion, looting, and pollution. And the last method I wanted to talk about that underwater archaeologists use is community outreach. So community outreach efforts help raise awareness about the importance of underwater cultural heritage and the need for its protection and preservation. So by engaging with the public, archaeologists can educate people about the significance of submerged archaeological sites and the role they play in understanding our shared history. Community outreach also facilitates collaboration between archaeologists and local communities, government agencies like the NERV, and nonprofit organizations and other stakeholders who are interested in archaeological cultural material. So with these groups, we as archaeologists can pull together our resources, expertise, and knowledge to address any common challenges that archaeological sites might face. We can help achieve shared goals, such as preserving and protecting cultural heritage sites, like Prospect Bluff. Now, before I actually talk about Prospect Bluff, I wanted to give you all a brief discussion about what maroonage actually is, because Prospect Bluff is a site of maroonage. So, maroonage is the act of escaping chattel slavery and seeking refuge in accessible areas while often forming autonomous communities. The history of maroonage dates back to the early days of European colonialization of the Americas, particularly in regions where plantation economies relied heavily on enslaved labor, such as the Caribbean, Latin America, and also here in North America. Enslaved Africans and indigenous people frequently escaped from plantations and formed independent communities in the surrounding wilderness. Maroonage also played a significant role in the resistance of slavery and colonial oppression. Many Maroons engaged in warfare, raids on plantations, and other acts of resistance to challenge the institutions of slavery and assert their rights to freedom and self-determination. They also provided refuge to newly escaped Maroons and facilitated the spread of resistance movements across different regions throughout the West. So maroonage here in Florida is what I'm studying and gets us to talking about Prospect Bluff. So Florida's dense forests, swamps, and remote regions provided refuge for enslaved individuals seeking freedom from the harsh conditions of slavery. Throughout the colonial and early American periods, Florida was controlled by a various amount of colonial powers, including Spain, Britain, and also the United States, which influenced the dynamics of maroonage within this region. Maroon communities in Florida often interacted with indigenous people, such as the Seminole, Creek, and Miccosukee tribes, and sometimes formed alliances with them against common enemies, including colonial authorities and also slave catchers. The history of maroonage in Florida reflects the complex interactions between enslaved Africans, indigenous people, and the colonial powers, and also the natural environment. Maroon communities in Florida played a significant role in the resistance against slavery and colonial oppression, and contributed to the cultural diversity and resilience of the region. Maroonage continued to be practiced in various forms throughout the Americas until the abolishment of slavery in the 19th century. Although Maroon communities were eventually assimilated into mainstream society or disbanded, their legacy of resistance and autonomy is still celebrated to the present day, which brings us to Prospect Bluff, also known as Negro Fort. So Prospect Bluff was a fortified settlement located along the Apalachicola River. It gained significance during the early 19th century as a site of resistance, conflict, and freedom-seeking effort by Maroons, indigenous people, and also free Black individuals. The fort was originally constructed by the British during the War of 1812 as a strategic military effort. After the war, it was later occupied by a group of Maroons and indigenous warriors who established a community within its walls. Under the leadership of a formerly enslaved African named Garçon, the Maroons fortified the structure and used it as a base for resistance against neighboring colonial territories, which were the Spanish and the United States at the time. The fort became a symbol of resistance against slavery and oppression in the region. In July 1816, U.S. forces launched a military expedition against the fort in retaliation for accused raids conducted by the Maroons there at Prospect Bluff. The fort's powder magazine was hit by a cannonball during the assault, resulting in a massive explosion that destroyed the fort and killed hundreds of people within, including a lot of its inhabitants. Today, the site of Prospect Bluff is a part of the Fort Gaston Historic Site, which is administered by the U.S. Forest Services. It serves as a memorial to the individuals who lived and died there and commemorates their struggle for freedom and equality in the face of adversity. So now that we've had a brief discussion about the history of Prospect Bluff, I want to get into the archaeology that I have been doing at Prospect Bluff for my master's research. So, kind of like what we talked about earlier about the remote sensing survey. So at Prospect Bluff, I did a reconnaissance survey that included using a marine magnetometer and a side-scan sonar. So a reconnaissance survey is an initial broad-scale assessment or exploration conducted to gather preliminary information about a particular area or topic. It is often the first step in a research project or investigation and is used to identify potential sites of interest, gather baseline data, and formulate research questions or hypotheses. So in archaeology, a reconnaissance survey involves systematically exploring a landscape to identify archaeological sites, features, and/or artifacts. This may involve walking or driving through an area, examining surface materials, and recording the locations of any visible archaeological remains. So reconnaissance survey, they help us as archaeologists a lot to determine where we should focus more intensive research, such as excavation or more intense marine survey. So the survey I did at Prospect Bluff was approximately 3,300 meters along the Apalachicola north and south of Prospect Bluff. So we didn't start at Prospect Bluff, but Prospect Bluff was my point, and I decided to go 3,300 meters is about 1.5 miles south, north and south of the fort. And I put this slide in just to remind you what a marine magnetometer and a side-scan sonar is, because we talked about it like 10 minutes ago. And the side-scan sonar that I'm showing you guys now is a bit different than the one. This is way more similar than the one was really fancy I showed you guys, but this is closer to the university equipment I actually used. And just to give you guys a reminder, on the left, the side-scan sonar is what gives us images from the seabed, and the magnetometer is what detects ferrous metals. So when paired together, you find data to find archaeological sites. So results of what I have been doing at Prospect Bluff. I am still in the data processing process. So I don't have all my results. I haven't actually processed the magnetometer data. And I'm slowly processing the sonar data. Still in master's work, still trying to get things typed up, but I have a little bit to show you guys on what I've actually processed and what I've been doing. So these images are just to show you guys like what sonar data might actually look like. And this is actually from the Apalachicola River, not exactly where, I'm not sure, along the river. But most of it is trees. But some of the hard lines might be cultural resources, but like I said, we have to pair it actually with the magnetometer data to get a better idea of what we're actually looking at. But this is just so you guys have an idea of what we're looking at. And this is another process of, this is the whole survey I actually did. So the top is the sonar data, which is the acoustic imaging, and the bottom is the magnetometer data. So I did the surveys on 2 separate days, but we're going to use them to compare and see sections of the river that might be of interest for archaeological investigation. And at the bottom, if you guys can see, I don't know if my screen is showing it clear enough, but there's like a little scale from blue to red, and the red points are the points that had like the biggest magnet hits for what would be like ferrous metals within the river.
Yeah, we can see the scale.
Okay, you can see the scale. Yeah. Oh, let me go back. So the red parts on where the river are, that's where, if we pair that with the sonar data, you can't really see the imaging on here. That's where we would focus a lot of our next investigation. Might not be me, but somebody. So for our ending discussion, I just wanted to talk about site stewardship and threats to Prospect Bluff and the importance of Prospect Bluff and why it should be protected. So to talk about the threats to Prospect Bluff, I wanted to talk about river erosion and looting. So coastal erosion can result in the gradual or rapid loss of archaeological sites, structures, and artifacts located along coastlines. As sea levels rise and shorelines erode, archaeological sites may become submerged or collapse into the sea, leading to the permanent destruction of its cultural heritage. So erosion caused by waves, currents, storms, and sea level rise cause physical damage to archaeological sites and structures located near coasts. So the continuous action of water and abrasive sediments can wear away exposed surfaces, erode soil layers, and undermine the stability of archaeological features, making archaeological sites vulnerable to actual collapse. And looting causes archaeological damage as well, and it's a significant threat to cultural heritage. So looting, as we all know, involves the illegal excavation and removal of artifacts from archaeological sites for profit, collecting, or trade. Looters often use metal detectors, shovels, and other tools to unearth artifacts, leaving behind damage to the site and disrupting archaeological context. So when artifacts are removed from the site, we as archaeologists no longer have context, which means we can no longer interpret the site, and that's pretty much our whole job. So looting is awful. Looting artifacts might also end up on the black market, sold to collectors, or smuggled out of the country, resulting to the loss of valuable cultural heritage and scientific information, which impacts us as archaeologists and also the public that is concerned with cultural heritage. So because I talked about the threats concerning Prospect Bluff, I want to talk about why Prospect Bluff is unique and why it needs to be protected. So Prospect Bluff is a very unique archaeological site. So to put it into context, only about 3 or 4% of archaeological sites here in the United States are actually concerned with maroonage and people escaping slavery. And I think only one more, and it's here in Fort Mose, that's actually associated with maroonage. So Prospect Bluff is one of the only sites here in the United States where we as archaeologists can look at underwater archaeology and maroonage. And maroonage is also an understudied topic. The cultural relevance of Prospect Bluff is also very important because, once again, it's a unique site and we don't have many of it. And this site can pour into knowledge and discovery of other maroon sites and how we can also interpret these sites. So overall, like sites like Prospect Bluff are an invaluable resource that contribute to our understanding of the past. It enriches our understanding of cultural heritage, and it inspires appreciation for the diversity and resilience of human societies throughout history. So protecting and preserving sites like Prospect Bluff is essential for safeguarding our shared heritage, and it ensures that our shared heritage significance is recognized and protected and celebrated for generations to come. So thank you. And I wanted to open the chat up for questions.
Well, while people are thinking about questions, I'll fill in a few to give people time to think. I don't see any just yet. You had mentioned that Prospect Bluff was a sacred site. I know when I first met Bria, we drove an hour north up to Prospect Bluff, and I met her and her colleagues there, and we were going to use the magnetometer. However, the site had been badly looted, and the Forestry Service was there. It's owned by the U.S. Forestry Service. They were there. They were calling the police, and there were holes everywhere where people had dug up different artifacts that we won't be able to tell what they were or have any information on them because now they're gone. And also, they shared with me that the Seminole Indians are the tribe that they consult regarding this site, also sometimes the Creek Indians, and that this is a sacred site and they don't want to have this site excavated necessarily. So it is limiting on our understanding, but it is a very important site, and I'm so glad that over the years it's come to the forefront. And I know I work with the National Park Service, and they had mentioned that it's actually a stop on considered a underground railroad site. So they're hopefully we'll be interpreting that soon at the site. And I was trying to see if we've got any other questions here. Let me
I
pull
think
this.
that's why it was so important for me to like imply underwater archaeology here, because remote census survey is non-invasive and it doesn't just archaeological site, like a place as sacred as Prospect Bluff. So doing underwater archaeology is one of those ways where we can try to further interpret the site without disturbing it.
Yes. Okay. Georgia. Georgia, you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Oh, I did it. Yay. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. Thank you, Bri, for this presentation. It's a very special spot along the river to many people, so I'm really glad you all are out there doing your research. I'm curious what you might expect to find upon further investigation, or anything you'd hope to find. What's down there?
So that's the fun part, right? So I'm actually not really sure. We kind of thought we might actually find a shipwreck that was previously thought to be associated with Fort Gaston, but from like the archival research, we think it might actually be one of the gunboats associated with Prospect Bluff. But with the methods I'm actually using, we can only kind of like locate historical artifacts, so military things. That's what will probably be ferrous metals, iron, and anything like that.
Thank you.
Okay. And Beth Appleton, you want to ask your question? Or I can ask it for you if you like. Oh, some reason it says you're not muted, but Beth asked, do we know how the community supplied food and medicine? Did they trade with other communities?
The people at Prospect Bluff?
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming so. So when I was doing a little bit of archival research, like I found some British maps, and there were quite a few near where Prospect Bluff was, further north up the river. There were multiple communities of like Black free communities and also indigenous communities further up the river. And from what I've read in multiple books, there were like active trading between other communities along the river that were there at Prospect Bluff as well. Because also to think about Prospect Bluff, like yes, it was a military fort, but also on its outskirts, there were also women and children who lived in the community side of it. So daily activities were going on at the fort, but they were also living on the outskirts of the fort.
Yeah, I think there's a fairly large community around the fort. And then Linda Buchanan asked, or Linda, I can try and take you off mute. I think I unmuted everybody. If you
Am I there?
You're there.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Bree, wonderful, wonderful work. Really, really appreciate it. And it's very, very important. So my question then that I posed is, are the identities of any of these lost souls known via census, via, lists, via slave records? Because the biographical information on these folks and their descendants is just so very important to American history.
Absolutely. So from military records, we know like people like there's a guy named Abraham, and I think I mentioned during the presentation, I think he was a military what is it called, like a sergeant, garçon. So there's military records, but the sad part about like places like Maroon places is we don't have a lot of archival evidence on the actual people. Everything that we usually pull is from military, like British and American and Spanish military records. But what I am hoping to do, like there hasn't been any actual anthropology and like ethnography done with the descendants, and there are descendants that are in the Bahamas and Trinidad. And it's out the scope of my research now, but it is something I have thought about to like better narrate these stories from a anthropological point of view through the descendants and stories, where because we don't have census records for these people, because as a Maroon, you're not trying to get caught, like you're escaping. So
Sure.
These are hidden
Sure.
stories, because of course, like oppression and slavery, but also because of the context of running away from slavery. That makes sense.
Sure. No, and that obviously is why it's just so very important and very, very interesting. And that's why you have to go out and get a PhD now, Bree. So
I know,
you're not done. Yeah,
you know,
yeah. So
because
you already know your research question, so just keep pushing. But all the best to you. Really, really good work. Thank you.
thank you so much.
Yeah, that was great. And now we have a question from Jim Mont. Jim, you're welcome to come off and articulate your question. Or I can also.
Are the questions in the chat?
They're in the questions box.
I don't know. Okay, I'll just let you.
Yeah, Jim had asked, it's hard to see unless you blow it up. Jim says, I thought I read a small group of survivors from the fort explosion escaped and settled on the north tip of Andros Island, Bahamas. Their ancestors are still there today. Do you know, do you have any knowledge of that?
Yeah, they actually still are in the Bahamas. I haven't been able to reach out to anybody. Like I said, that's not the scope of what I'm doing now, but what I hope that I can absolutely do later. But they're absolutely in the Bahamas, and they see themselves as descendants of Prospect Bluff.
Great.
And will be a valuable resource if we want to expand these stories as well. Very valuable resource.
And Georgia mentions the book by Dale Cox. I know, I'm sure you're aware of that. She had mentioned about that book. And Jim Mont had also said, excellent work. We're all looking forward to further research. I have one other question. I think I got that one. Surprised David Adlerstein hasn't had a question. He usually is good about it. But I wondered myself if you had the Forbes store is always talked about as being across the river from Prospect Bluff. I don't know the timing on it, whether it was not operating at the time that all this was going on, or but
the sports company, I think they actually I think they were actually where the fort was before the British used it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm mistaken. There was a company there before the British used it as a military fort. And they also, the British also recruited that company, enslaved labor to stay at the fort and help work for the British.
Yeah. think David, you're not coming through real clear.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you need any special permissions from the Indian tribe to do any of this work?
So technically, I only have worked through the state, but personally, I reached out to all of the tribes to consult. I sent out emails. I let them know everything that I was doing. I'm also gonna keep them updated with everything I find, but I wasn't required to, but personally, I decided to consult with the Choctaw, Seminole, Miccosukee, and Creek Shipos.
Great. I'm just scrolling through the, okay. Rebecca, she asked, where did the term maroon come from?
So, Jesus, it's a French term for runaway.
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, so I would say Haiti is like, Haiti and Jamaica, they have a bigger maroon culture than we do. So the term is like a Caribbean term for people who escaped slavery. Yeah, a French term for runaway.
I looked it up in the dictionary once and it didn't have it.
Yep.
I
And I
was
think
surprised.
and a lot of like my end discussion for my work is talking about how we can like, compare like maroonage here to maroonage in the Caribbean, let it be Jamaica or Haiti, because it's way more well studied in the Caribbean than it is in the continental US.
Yeah, that's exciting. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions? Trying to go through here once again. See if we have any. And Linda asked, it's a substantive and interesting presentation. Thank you. Have any of the inhabitants been identified by name? She may have asked that. Sorry. It's hard to tell who asked what when on this
It's
chat.
okay. I got to ask it. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Just making sure we have all the questions. Rebecca said, I missed the very beginning. Maybe you said it, always confused about Prospect Bluff versus Fort Gadsden.
So Fort Gadsden was a earlier fort that was built over Prospect Bluff. So I think initially in the 60s, archaeologists were actually excavating, looking for remains from Fort Gadsden, but they kept running into British artifacts. So then when they did the archival research, they realized that there was an earlier fort, which was Prospect Bluff, and I think that's what ended excavations there at Fort Gadsden. So yeah, Fort Gadsden was a fort that happened after Prospect Bluff, and it's actually a lot smaller than Prospect Bluff too. So it's like a fort within the perimeters of what Prospect Bluff was.
Yeah, I've actually seen a map, the map superimposed, and it's interesting. But that's and I think the Park Service is going to probably change the name, but that's the indication I've heard, that because it's a more encompassing history, not just the American view of that. So, and yes, Rebecca, it is the same place.
The exact same place.
Okay. All right. Unless we have any other questions, want to thank Bria for joining us today, and she's going to be back in May and still doing work here with her colleagues Mike Toman and Nicole Grennan. So we're excited to have them back, and her colleague Nicole will be speaking at the April Sci-Cafe, and that's April 25th from 3 to 4. We had one more comment that was from Jim Mott, and it said, excellent work. So did you have anything else you wanted to say to us, or?
I guess like to just end everything because I know people are like, oh, what are you gonna find? Like, I don't really know. And to say, like how we always say, like as scientists, like no data is also data. And I'm hoping like my work here could actually build on the archaeological study of Maroonage. Like I said, there's only maybe 2 sites in the South. Like most of the Underground Railroad sites that we have studied have been in the North. And there's actually no archaeology going on about what people are now calling the saltwater railroad, which is the Underground Railroads here in the South, how people use water to escape slavery. So I'm hoping work like mine can build on important to like methods and theory archaeologists can now use to narrate stories of Maroonage, which have been severely understudied, like here in the South. If that makes sense to you guys. So even if there's nothing found, even if it's still a breaking point for stories and history that needs to be told. It needs to be studied.
Definitely. And we're all behind you. So
Yes.
we want to find out too. So, well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and we're all intrigued by your studies. So thanks everybody for joining us and we will see you next month.
Hi guys, thank you guys for coming.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Bree. Appreciate it.